PixInsights in Serial and other photo editors are full of powerful tools for editing images. But of all of them, the histogram transformation tool and the curves tool are the most powerful by far. Learn to make solid flat histograms that preserve all the data, and you can then apply the curves tool to accomplish almost any editing function that you might need. And today, I'm going to show you how in this episode on Mastering Curves. We're going to look at 3 case studies: the Eastern Veil, the Bubble Nebula, and right now, the Cygnus Wall. Applying the exact same methodology that I covered in my last video on mastering histograms, I'm just going to quickly adjust the histogram so that we can then begin editing it with the curves tool. At this point, I have run spectrophotometric color calibration and SCNR on each of the original XISF images. No other editing has been done. You'll notice the entire process of adjusting the histogram takes less than 60 seconds, as I noted in my last video on mastering histograms. I'm just going to draw the left icon up to the very beginning of the light curve, and the middle icon up to the right side of the light curve, taking care to keep the left and middle icon outside all the relevant data. When you're done making your histograms adjustment, you should be presented with a bright enough to work with, but otherwise flat, master image. Think of this as an editing plate or an editing tableau. It's good when it's flat. It presents a neutral landscape upon which to work curves magic. Now, I've opened up the curves tool, and we're going to start editing. The order to edit is luminance first, then saturation, then, if called for, individual color channels. And I'm going to begin dragging from nearer the top third of the curve in order to increase the upper brightness and the midtones. This will sharpen the brights to make the edges of the shadows stand out, which works really well with the Cygnus Wall. Then I'm going to slightly drag down the lower quarter of the curve to deepen the shadows. I don't want to black them out, that's not desirable, but I do want to deepen them. This transforms the tableau into a moody image, which works well with the Cygnus Wall. It's a very dramatic nebulous structure. But the thing to remember about curves is, at any time, you can drop the curves, change them and try something else, or you can clone the image you're working on, save the last tableau, and then try a new editing strategy. Let's erase the entire curve structure that we already made and start over. This time, I'm going to make a very steep curve, and what this will do is it will greatly increase the contrast within the image. We're not going to use this, it's just frankly too much contrast. I'm just demonstrating. To increase your contrast, just make your curve steeper. Often, this isn't desirable. It makes astrophotography images look blocky. But there are times some judicious use of steepening contrast can serve to increase a bit of drama within an image. Alright, well, I think the point has been made. Let's go ahead and drop this curves pattern and return to a more standard curve pattern. We'll reset the curves and make something of a typical S curve, raising the top a little to bring up the brights and lowering the bottom a little to bring up the darks. Then we're going to work the middle with the goal of bringing up the brightness of the midtones. There are a lot of midtones in the Cygnus Wall. This is an iterative process. As we work, we are going to test one iteration of the curves after another. To adjust into the darks, we grab the curve at the lower point, a grab point, and move the curve up or down to raise or lower the shadows. We do likewise on the high side of the curve tool to adjust the brights, and we can grab and adjust the midsections to adjust the midtones. We can add new grab points anywhere along the curve. Ultimately, our goal is to deepen the shadows enough to make them dramatic, but avoid blacking out regions that should not be truly black. We want to pull down the brightest brights so they do not become blown out. And we want to bring up and emphasize the midtones at the middle of the curve until we get an image that appears to have a good balance of luminosity. Because the Cygnus Wall is a very complex image, we're going to do this a little bit at a time. We're going to address luminosity first and then apply it to the final image, sort of like painting on a layer of luminosity. When we have the luminosity where we want it, we're going to go ahead and apply that to the actual image. That looks pretty good, but I think that the luminosity could be touched up a bit more. So now I'm going to use the curves tool to further adjust the luminosity, this time bringing up and enhancing the midtones, the upper brights, and dropping the darkness of the shadows just a little bit. Then I'm going to apply this luminosity adjustment also to the tableau, as if painting on another layer of curve. And when I'm satisfied with luminosity, I'll go ahead and switch to saturation. Here I'm going to begin by creating a C-curve in the upper 1/3 of the curve. which will enrich the color of the entire nebula and saturate color a bit more in the brighter areas. This will help to add drama to the image. Now this image was shot with a color camera, a Player 1 Uranus-C to be precise. But what if I wanted to make the image look a bit more like a narrowband image, which is to say, apply false color, imitating an SHO or an HOO kind of palette? I guess I could do that with a script, but what if I told you could pull off something like it with nothing but the Curves tool? It's even better if you have a Curves tool and some color masks. But as we're talking about mastering the Curves tool here, we're just going to work with the Curves tool for now. Let's see what we can accomplish with it. It's very subtle, but there are traces of yellow wanting to come out in the nebula. The nebula is predominantly red, and red and green make yellow. So we'll access the green channel on the Curves tool and begin to adjust it. We're going to drag the high side of the green curve up, which will transform the brighter colors into yellows. And we'll drag the low side of the green curve down, which will leave nice rich reds in the darker regions. I like the way that looks, so we're going to go ahead and apply this curve structure to the image. With that done, we're going to go ahead and reset the Curves tool and begin applying another layer of adjustment. Adjusting the blue channel can help blacken space and deepen reds, so we're going to go ahead and pull the blue channel around, especially pulling down the blue curve about 1/3 of the way from the top to enrich the upper mid-bright reds. When that's done, I'm going to switch back to the red channel. There I'm going to grab the red channel roughly from the middle and draw it up into a C-curve to enrich the mid-tone reds. And then about a quarter way from the top, I'm going to drag that red curve up even further to enhance the brighter reds, which helps give the image depth. Then I'm going to go to the bottom quarter of the curve and draw the red channel back down to neutralize the dark ranges. We don't want red dark shadows. Ideally, dark should be dark. When that's done, we're going to open up the green channel. Blending more green into our reds will enhance where we want yellow to appear in the sky or background kind of region, between the upper clouds and the lower billowing red clouds. And green plays a very important role in the way the human eye perceives brightness. Enhancing the green will increase the sense of overall brightness within the image. In the end, we'll drag the upper third of the green channel up, which will enhance the vibrance and saturation of the region that we want to look yellow. And we'll pull the lower third of the green channel down, which will help avoid a color bias in the shadows, along with helping enrich those nice red colors that we are using to outline the billowing structures within this nebula. There, the Cygnus wall looks good. Now I'm just going to make a quick adjustment to the stars. I'm going to use the histogram transformation tool to increase the overall brightness of the stars. The stars are a subjective element. Make them as bright as you feel is right for the image. If you're curious about how to do a histogram adjustment for stars, see my previous video on mastering histograms. But when the process is done, we'll open up the Curves tool and just drag the saturation up a little bit. Just enough to enhance the color of the stars. We do not want to make the mistake of hypersaturating them. We just want to bring up their color so they look naturally colorful and lustrous. Alright, let's move on to case study 2, the Bubble Nebula. As before, I'm going to begin with a quick histogram adjustment using the methodology that I covered in my previous video on mastering histograms. The final adjustment will leave us with a flat image with all the data preserved, with the light curve itself stretched enough that we can then begin making fine adjustments with the Curve tool. We'll just speed through the process of the histogram adjustment since it was studied in the previous video, and get on to working with curves. Alright, let's go ahead and open up this image. If you're wondering why the Bubble Nebula is offset like this, it's because it's very near a star cluster, and I wanted to capture them both within this image. So, with the Curves tool opened, as always, we're going to start by adjusting luminosity. Now overall, this is a fairly dark image, but there is that very bright bubble right in the center, and we don't want to blow out that bubble and lose detail in it. So we begin by dragging up the curve about 1/3 from the top and bringing up the brightness of the mid-range and the upper parts. And then grabbing the curve at the lower 20% and slightly dragging it down to darken the space. And then adding a new grab point up near the very top and dragging down the upper brights so that we do not blow out the brightest regions of this image. And as you can see, I didn't like the way that curve was looking, so I just reset it and start all over again. This is an iterative process. If you don't like the way one image looks, go ahead and alter it and try again. Now I like this more or less, and I'm going to save this iteration by applying the process to the image. Now with the luminance where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and begin adjusting the color. We'll start out by resetting the Curves tool and opening up a new preview window. Now this is already a very red nebula, very colorful. So I'll begin by enriching the saturation, but only with a very shallow C-curve on the S or saturation channel. And since I started the curve 1/3 up, it will especially deepen the brighter reds. Now there is some yellow hidden in this image in the brighter region around the bubble, and I want to bring that out. And what two colors mixed together make yellow? Green and red. So I'll switch to the green channel and drag the upper quarter of the green curve up to put more green in the brightest regions. Then I'll drag the lower part of the green channel down so as not to alter the middle brightness and the darker reds in the image. You can see this process has made the space a little too red, so we'll switch to the red channel and drag the very bottom of the red channel down just a little bit to neutralize the red in the space. We want the space to be black. Dragging that down has introduced a little blue into the space. We're going to do just the same thing, switch to the blue channel and drag the lower quarter of the blue channel down just a little bit, again to neutralize the space. We want the space to be black. Now the colors are balanced pretty much exactly where I want them, but in the bubble, the brights are somewhat blown out. So what we need to do is switch back to the luminosity channel, go up to the top 20% or so of that channel and drag it down just a little bit to darken that region. We don't want to make it dark, we just want to darken it enough that the details of the stars within the structure of the bubble will show. Dragging down the very upper portion of the curve drags down the entire curve. So we'll make another grab point at the middle parts of the luminance curve and drag it back up to neutral, but that brightens the darkness of the space a little too much. So we'll go down to the bottom quarter of the luminance curve and drag it down just a little to re-blacken that space. And then finally, we'll apply that process and end up with a final image that is again just what we want. Lastly, for our case study, we have the Eastern Veil, a very complex and beautiful nebula, a remnant of a supernova from thousands of years ago, and easily, I think, one of the most extraordinary things that you can observe with your telescope. As before, we're going to stretch the light curve using the methodology that I went over in the previous video on mastering histogram transformation, and then we'll switch to the Curves tool. As always, we'll start working on the luminance channel in the Curves tool, and we'll begin with a fairly standard C-curve, grabbing the upper 1/3 of the luminance channel and dragging it up to emphasize the brightness of the nebula. Then we're going to grab the lower 1/4 of the luminance channel and pull it down a little to darken the space around the nebula. This allows us to bring in good brightness and contrast within the nebula without dragging the brightness of the space up around it. When I work in the Curves tool, I do not like to lose information. I don't like curves to lose contact with the upper right or lower left corners of the box. This means information is being clipped. So if that happens, I will create new grab points and pull the curve back down so that the ends of the curve make contact with the corners, preserving all information within the curve. However, I found that the previous curve iteration did not bring up the midtones as much as I wanted. There is a fair bit of gaseous material in and around the nebula, and I don't want to lose it. So this time I restart the curve and drag up the luminance channel a good ways just left of the middle. This brings up much more of the midtone brightness. Then I once again grab the lower 20% of the curve and pull it down to darken the blacks, and drag the upper right third of the curve gently down until it meets with the upper right corner of the box, preserving all the information within the image. This also makes the upper right side of the curve less steep so that the brighter areas do not become blown out. I like this outcome, so I'm going to go ahead and apply the process to the image. When it's done, we'll reset the curve, then go ahead and work in saturation. We're going to make a typical saturation C-curve, grabbing the curve from the upper third and moving it up just enough to emphasize the color within this already colorful nebula. We want to bring out that color. But the saturation channel drags all the color channels together, and that can hypersaturate certain areas. To avoid this, we'll make only a very minor adjustment, just a small C-curve on the saturation channel. Then grab the red channel just right of the middle to pull up the middle luminosity reds with a slight emphasis on the brighter reds, thereby emphasizing the red filaments and gases. That also brings up the red of the space, so I'll grab the lower side of the red channel and lower it just a little to neutralize the red in the darkness of space. There are nice blues in this image, so we're then going to switch to the blue channel and do the exact same thing to bring out the blues. We'll raise the upper side of the blue curve to enrich the blue of the blue filaments in the nebula, and we'll draw down the lower side of the blue curve to neutralize the blue emphasis that turns up in the space. We want the space black. Now I think this looks nice, but those blues don't really pop, do they? You know how to make blues pop? Give them kind of a lightning bright pizzazzle? Open up the green channel, grab the green and drag it up just a little bit. It will give the blue an amazing bright kind of electric flare. And then, once again, go down to the lower side of the green channel and drag it down a little so that you neutralize the appearance of green in the space. This also helps to enrich the reds. This is an iterative process. You are fundamentally experimenting as you go. I've worked enough with the color wheel over the years to have a good sense of how changing one channel is going to affect the related colors. So expect as you start doing this type of thing, you'll make mistakes. You will, it's fine. You can always just hit the reset button and start all over. Or even better, when you're satisfied with how the image looks, clone the image and apply the process to it, and continue working with another instance of the image, experimenting and learning as you go along. That's exactly what you see me doing here in the Curves tool. I'm just experimenting with the adjustments until I have everything just like I like it. And overall, this looks pretty good, I think. It's about time to apply this process to the final image. And here are the final outcomes with the stars composited back into each image. The only other editing tools I use, besides the histogram transformation tool and the curves tool, was noise and blur exterminator after the histograms and the curves adjustments were made. So I mean it when I say that really you can accomplish almost any astro image editing task with nothing else but the histogram and the curves tool. Those two tools by far are the most powerful tools in your toolbox. Master them and the sky is truly the limit for an astrophotographer. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and shoot the sky.